Morning. Today, get this straight. I want to rehash a little bit about the hierarchy of the mind. And I stumbled a little bit yesterday, but and I wanted to clarify the steps as I see it. And the consequences of different states of mind on the overall mastery of the mind, if you will. And I mentioned yesterday I'd like to talk about taming the mind, adapting the mind, accepting it when it's useful, and understanding when it's an obstacle, when it ceases to be useful. And it ceases to be useful when you look to it for any ultimate solution or answer. You let it entertain both you and itself. What I found about the mind, if I give it a task and I want it to cease being so loud, it's quite satisfied, apparently, to have a task. Oh boy, I've got a task. Go, go, go. And it's gone. And I enjoy the respite. And this is all a process of taming the mind. And then looking to the mind as a source of entertainment. The next step is calming the mind. Settling down. And I mentioned before that I'm blessed that I live in a constant state of equanimity, acceptance of what is. And this has led to some success at calming. At times, it feels the effect of calming the entire being, calming the entire body, obviously has an effect on the mind. So I didn't give myself enough credit. I said that I could tame. But I do enjoy calmness. And again, I attribute that directly to the blessing of equanimity. And then the next step is to quiet the noise. So even if it's calm, it can be quite noisy. Noisier than probably necessary. So it's this quiet beyond calm. And it's from here that I've been less than successful. On the ultimate goal to clarity. And the next step after quiet is still, just as still waters. Just still it. There's not even a hint of a breath of noise. And then the ultimate goal, as I understood it and as I worked so diligently for 30 plus years, was to silence the mind. And silencing the mind is where true clarity lies. Through the steps, the hierarchy, the accomplishment to silencing the mind, perhaps resides clarity. And I have to say that when I was thinking about clarity, clarity is also the absence of questions. And I long ago gave up questioning of myself, much less anything from the outside. Because after all, the outside represents the illusory, the world of illusion, the world of Maya. So, clarity, perhaps, perhaps I do have some, if indeed giving up questions is a precursor or even a sign to clarity, of clarity. And I want to read something about the silent witness, which I've alluded to and talked to before. The one who watches, who listens, the silent witness. So, talking about meditation here, the intention of meditation is not to calm or silence the mind or to control it, but to become gradually more familiar and comfortable with the mind. The reality is the only thing that contains everything is nothing. The head divides and the heart unites. Okay, so maybe that gives me a little bit of a respite, a little bit of wiggle room to indeed the state of clarity. If anything is clear to me, it's the oneness of us all, everything and nothing, no thing that I talked about before. If that's clarity, maybe I have more of it than I give myself credit for. But clarity to me means once you've silenced the mind, before you've silenced it, once you've stilled it, it's like still waters, and you can see clearly all the way to the bottom. But still, I'm uncertain about this seeing, as I know for sure that I remember past, present, and future. And I'm seeing and remembering in between those two activities. You can have a clear glimpse of what clarity represents, the difference between seeing and remembering. So even though the silent witness, the fact that meditation is not intended to silence the mind, to control the mind, it's more about this silent witness to watch, remembering that the mind tends to divide where the heart unites. But if you're using the mind as the beautiful tool that was given to us, you'll find that if you use it correctly, you'll find that there's less and less divisiveness within it, and more it unites, just as the heart. Sometimes it's really hard for me to separate the two. When they're both working correctly, I believe that they're part and parcel of the same thing. Maybe that's another polarity, heart and mind. Is it best to follow your heart? 100%. Yes. Is it best to follow your mind? Well, there are some questions there, aren't there? But in the study in my discipline of Raja Yoga, the answer would be equally resounding yes to follow the mind when it's being used correctly. But that also, the same caveat could apply to the heart, couldn't it? There's selfish love. We're talking about the selfless mind and the selfless heart. Polarities, each equally true. And that leads me to sages of the ages, I call them. And in that spirit, I'm going to give the time frame of the following people that have been more than meaningful in my own personal spiritual inquiry. And I can segue to sages here safely by pointing out that they point to the bond. When they point to the bond between two irreconcilable concepts, diametrically opposed polarities, when a sage is a sage, they point to the bond between these two polarities. We just mentioned heart and mind as one of them. So, let's start off with something that I talk to my Christian friends about. And I read the Bible, and I include Jesus of Nazareth in my list that I'm going to, my list of influential sages in mind. But I want to say that I never have been a Christian. And in this spirit, I want to mention that upon careful reading of the New Testament, I've read the Old Testament just as carefully, but for our purposes today, the New Testament, I couldn't find one place where Jesus said, become a Christian. And that's with the consideration that the newest part of the Bible, the newest part of the New Testament, was written 60 to 100 years, as I understand, after the death of the historical Jesus. So even in that up to 200-300 years, they were adding to the mythology that can't help to grow around spiritual figures. No different than what's grown around the Buddha. But I can't find where he ever said, at least he never said to me, become a Christian. He said, become a Christ. And this is exactly my same relationship with the Buddha. With Buddha was, don't become a Buddhist, become a Buddha. They both pointed the way between these two irreconcilable differences, diametrically opposed polarities. Okay. And so I'm going to have to look, get my notes here on the screen with me, and I'm going to look because and I don't know if this makes you feel uncomfortable. I feel a little uncomfortable. I'm more comfortable speaking here, just so that you know. But I'll come up a little closer because I want to read the years. And we're going to start off with the Buddha because chronologically, he was before the rest. But also in significance for me, my personal life resonated more with his teachings and with his being than anything else. So Buddha was born, they say, 563 through 480 BC, before Christ, which I grew up using, but now they use born 463 to 480 BC, died 483 to 400. I don't know, I get confused reading that. Let's try that again. He was born anywhere from 563 to 480 BC and died anywhere from 483 to 400 BC, before Christ. Now it's commonly used BCE, and I had to go look, I admit to having to go look up, to Google it, before the Common Era. So most of the dates that you see, I grew up with before Christ. Now it's before the Common Era to separate from AD. And I've spoken much of what his teachings have meant to me. And then next on my list is the historical Jesus. And the Jesus of Nazareth, 4 BC to 30 AD. So that's pretty much accepted that at between 4 BC to 30 to 33 BC. There's 33, a big number. Let's take 33. But at 4, okay. Jesus of Nazareth, also referred to as Jesus of Nazareth and Jesus Christ, was a 1st century Jewish preacher and religious leader. He is the central figure of Christianity. Most Christians believe him to be the incarnation of God the Son and the awakened Messiah, and the awaited awakened Messiah that was predicted in the Old Testament. I read a nice quote that kind of helps me with the role that Jesus, besides being a perfect example of what a man should be, fearless when I call for it, continually loving and embracing. And this is a quote from Carl Jung. The whole point of Jesus' life was let's start over again. The whole point of Jesus' life was not that we should become exactly like him, but that we should become ourselves in the same way he became himself. Jesus was not the great exception, but the great example. So when I said become a Buddha, That's your own unique Buddha. Become a Christ. That's your own unique Christ. Each one of us has within the sacred dwelling, do, flower, and express itself in the perfect form that it is. Each of us has a unique contribution to the beauty of the whole. Each of us represents a different aspect of the whole. Remember, the whole is not without parts. Each of us is a part of the whole. Another polarity, part and whole, partness and wholeness. But each is equally so, as is all polarities have been and will be. So Jesus was not without his role, but primarily as a beacon to show the way, to light the way for each and every one of us. And then we go to my friend Bodhidharma. And I say friend because even though his stern countenance, I feel very close to him because, as you know, he's one of my two spirit guides. And within Bodhidharma, this stern, almost growling figure that every picture that we see, every depiction of him contains, was more or less my court gesture. Non-stop talking, somersaulting, but like most gestures, if you listen to them, what might be considered gibberish is, upon closer examination, reflections of pearls of wisdom. Okay, so Bodhidharma. We know about Bodhidharma, we've talked about him. Dhammo. He always resonated with me. And probably consequently, he became a spirit guide. I don't know really when I became aware of my two. It'd be a good thing to, I'll have to work on that, contemplate that. The next figure in history, Wei Ning, who is another one from 638 to 1750. 1713, there we go, lucky three. The sixth patriarch, accredited with the Platform Sutra, who is said to be enlightened by hearing the Diamond Sutra. But he had a powerful influence on me, as I've said before, because he represented every man in us all. And he didn't need the accolades. His ascension was generally unrecognized in the early times of when the fifth patriarch turned over the reins, surreptitiously as it turns out, publicly proclaiming another student, disciple, who went on to found and privately, quietly, secretly even, giving his robe and bowl, the true sign of ascension in the lineage. Because after all, that's supposed to be all that's possessed. So everything he possessed was given to Weining. And I've always celebrated his humbleness and his lack of need for recognition, being completely at ease in the secret nature and the unknown ascension. But eventually, like all good things, his light shined through, that even the dullest could see his wholeness, his sageness. Okay. Now there's a group of guys up. Roger Bacon. He's my other. He's a Franciscan monk. And recently he's been with me. He's the silent guy. He's huge and tall, and you can't see his face because it's covered by his hood. Darkness. Never talks. In comparison to Dhammo, who never silence. Here we go with polarities. Small guy somersaulting, a tall guy with no feet who floated. And recently, because of some research I've been doing into grayness, into my love affair with the gray, the significance of grayness as a gradient between blacks and whites, absolutes. I read about the gray friars who were Franciscan and called because they were gray. So, up until this moment, I had seen, I experienced, I remembered this better because seeing is not amongst my skills. I remember him in the brown robes of maybe the movies. But immediately when I read Gray, the Gray Friars, that was correct. Of course he was always in gray. I just chose to see brown, but quick to recognize when reminded. See the difference between seeing and remembering? I had to be reminded. I had to remember instead of seeing. Perhaps if I could see as a gift of clarity, I would have seen his gray robes immediately. But I like the process of remembering. Maybe gives me some peace for the elusive nature of clarity and seeing. Okay, so he meant so much to me. And I have him at 1220 to 1292, 13th century figure. And for him, his significance started in this lifetime as Roger Bacon, the father of modern science. And I know nothing about his previous incarnations. And they matter little to me, quite honestly, as significance of him was in that incarnation. For whatever reason, I don't question, I just accept. The man without questions, after all. And now, the next three figures, their dates of birth and death, dates of coming into this plane and passing from this plane, are very similar. So I want to put them in the order of significance, personal significance for me. We start with Paramahamsa Yogananda. His autobiography, A Yogi, has meant so much to me. But his coming to America in the 1920s and trying to synthesize Christianity with his Hinduism doesn't always work for me. But you have to put it in the context of talking to his audience. Each of the following all have this in common, that they share their teachings, share the Dharma, depending on who's listening. Now, besides, I think I read his book, Autobiography of Yoga, when I was like 13, first exposed, and that was really profound. Even though it was full of magic and being teleporting and being in two different places at the same time, all these things, which are likely possible, which are possible, never had much appeal to me. What I celebrated in him was his allegiance to his teacher, his devotion, his practice of bhakti yoga through the compassion, through all-encompassing love, and the love for his teacher represented his love of each and every one of us. Profound, profound. And he's the only one on my list that I've physically been to his ashram. He has an ashram in Malibu, California, on the lower mountain above Malibu, which is just from the first moment I walked in the gates, and as I circled the Great Lake and went into small rooms where he was said to have spent a lot of time in his devotional pursuits. A tremendous sense of peace. So this is the only place of any of my teachers that I've physically walked on space that they've personally consecrated. And it was a powerful experience. But I want to add here that it doesn't make me want to go on a pilgrimage. I don't have much really desire to walk where the sages have walked, to worship and meditate where the sages have personally been. I feel more than content with sharing them where they really reside, which is available to each and all one of us, no matter where we physically are. But I do know from this experience that there's something to be said, and if the life presents me with the opportunity, I'm not immune. But as far as pursuing, desiring, to go on a spiritual pilgrimage, a physical spiritual pilgrimage, because we all are on spiritual pilgrimages, whether we know it or not, but a physical manifestation dedicated to walking where they've walked, to touching what they've touched, is not among my overpowering needs to do. But what will come, will come. And I do remember. So no doors are ever closed. All doors remain open. And along the same time as Paramahamsa was born in 1893, Sri Rama Maharishi was 1879 to 1950, born a little earlier, passed a little bit later. But he lived his whole life where Paramahamsa left his home in Benares in India and came and spent most of his life in America. Ramana spent his entire life in southern India, and he lived on the foothills, not below, on Arunachala, a mountain in southern India, a sacred mountain. And we'll talk about Sadhguru, but Sadhguru also was enlightened on the same. Let me look at it a bit. Arunachala mountain. And Ramanana practiced my blend of primarily jhana yoga. And it was beginning that being exposed to him, I kind of hold him, I kind of credit him, I bless him for the beginnings of my ability to accept the failure that Arjuna, here I go, Raja Yoga, the discipline, the sweating meditations weren't for me. The rumbling started because he combined bhakti. And bhakti to me, compassion, but it also means inner directed compassion. Compassion for yourself. Cut yourself some slack. And this is what I was unable to do. Too rigid in my 30 years of Raja Yoga. And Ramanana started pointing the way. And even though he's the self-inquiry, based on self-inquiry, jhana yoga, the rigorous self-inquiry, where nothing is sacred, everything is examined. Thoroughness and rigor. But remembering the bhakti, the tenderness, the forgivingness that bhakti yoga encompasses. So, at the time, I didn't really know how profound his teachings would be. And his consideration of the self as his guru was revolutionary for me. I felt the connection between self and the wholeness. But to look at the self as your guru, as your teacher, as your source of wisdom, touched me deeply and became a part of me with early exposure, even though it took another 10 years to get it, to surrender, to let go of the rigidity, to forgive myself. So Ramanana, Sri Ramanana Maharishi. And another guy that just didn't have the same kind of immediate response. And I'm gonna try his name. Nisar Kodata Maharishi. And Nisargadatta lived from 1897 to 1991. And his whole deal, this book that he left behind is I Am That. And this I Am, reflecting on I Am as a gateway to progressive and permanent awakening. It was so focused on I Am. I am that I am. I am that, which means everything. Just by solely focusing on that, I am that, came his enlightenment. And he emanated bhakti yoga, selfless service. His whole life was selfless service of unconditional love. He epitomized the simplicity. He epitomized the giving up of the illusion of what he was and the acceptance, embracing himself and everyone along with him. So it's funny, my immediate exposure to him took time to blossom and flower and to really appreciate the beauty of his teaching and the simplicity of his methods. And that brings us to probably a controversial one, Osho. I like Osho, okay? Yeah. Rajneesh, full of controversy. But what I got from him was a sense of lightening up. Everything didn't have to be so serious. He loved to stir the pot. And he didn't always fit the preconceived notion that people hold of what a sage was. But his contribution to me personally, and seeing his image, knowing people that have known him, led me to recognition of his contributions to my own spiritual journey, my own spiritual inquiry, to question everything, to be irreverent when it was called for. He certainly demonstrated with all his Rolls Royces and his people that things that he was able to accumulate, the number of followers, certainly can show you how certain spiritual laws, the law of abundance, where when is too many Rolls Royces, when do you have too many? And I think that there was a parity there. I don't think it was really about acquiring. It was about showing that it could be done. So Osho's here. My most controversial, probably, but nevertheless, he'll remain here. And Osho was with us until 1990. He was born in 1931 and lived till 1990. And then the next two guys, they started off, both of them have a lot of commonalities. Let's see, let's talk about Wayne Dyer. He was born in 1940, he passed 2015. And Stuart Wilde, born a few years later, 1946 to 2013. Both of these guys were influential to me because they started out with self-help, so big in the 70s and the 80s, and made names for themselves as self-help in the old tradition of Napoleon Hill. About accomplishing, about abundance. In his way, Osho was a proponent of these same skills, recognizing the soulness of them and the availability, abundance. Nothing is lacking. But both of these men, Wayne Dyer and Stuart Wilde, became greater than proponents of self-help. They both journeyed to the spiritual realm. And something that Wayne Dyer said that has just stayed with me about enlightenment is the quiet acceptance of what is. No. Yes. That's what he said. Again, enlightenment is the quiet acceptance of what is. And, pardon me, Wayne, I have my own way of taking his words and making it more meaningful. Instead of quiet acceptance, I said enlightenment is the gentle acceptance of what is, because I needed this message of gentleness. I needed to be gentle with myself. So every time I would read his enlightenment, it's the quiet acceptance of what is beautiful. But what I would hear is enlightenment is the gentle acceptance of what is. I believe that most of my life I've been a gentleman to the world around me, but much of my life I had to learn that gentleness starts within, to be gentle on myself, to truly represent, to epitomize the art of gentleness to those around me. So now, all of these stages have passed. I want to get to two that are still with us. And Sadhguru, I just love this man. Of all the contemporary videos of him and Adyashanti to follow are the two that I enjoy the most. I love how his mind works. I love how logical he is, even in the realms where most think logic is not applicable. Beautiful man, check him out. Love to listen to him. And Adyashanti, born 1962, a young guy. Adyashanti is just incredible. I've learned so much. His teachings just resonated for me. And whereas Paramahamsa is the only person that I went and walked on the same grounds that he walked in, Adyashanti is the only one who I've been fortunate enough to see in person. He came to the East-West Center at my University of Hawaii sometime in the late 70s. And a dear Jessica Holmbaum, a dear, dear friend, went with me to see him, to listen to him. And I loved his style. He was quiet a lot. When we first came into the room, he just sat, maybe even for 3 to 5 minutes, and didn't gaze around, but focused. And it got to the point where it felt a little uncomfortable. The people were stirring, and the uncomfortable silence that's so hard for people to deal with. And from there, it was just beautiful. Just a ordinariness. He didn't have any costume. He didn't have any robes. I wear what I wear, not as a costume, but a reminder of the one white. It looks black, it's dark purple. The one white, the one purple amongst the white. The one amongst the many. But my friend got up and got up to the microphone after he was finished and said, "I've never met an enlightened person before. It's so nice to meet you. It's my privilege to talk to you." And Adyashanti, to his credit, just smiled. What a beautiful memory to be in the presence of a sage. Thank you.